Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr. This is episode 392 of CryptoBiography, and it is part 4 and the conclusion of The Next Day. And here we go. Bette, with her parents, were among the group from their town who met the irrationalists on the road. There were 20 of them in total. There was a group of all adult men, no women or children, and they were marching on the town. They were at least double her town folks brigade. All were armed. Mostly they had spears or clubs, but a few had bows with arrows at the ready. "Halt!" shouted Bette's mom. The men stopped some 10 meters away. "Irrationalists are not welcome here. You will leave and not return," her mom added. Now she wasn't shouting, but speaking in a carrying voice. She stopped talking. Her mom had told everyone just before they had walked here that when she stopped talking, everyone needed to be silent. The first side to speak would lose. And it was silent on both sides. Finally, one of the men spoke up. "We're coming, whether you like it or not." They started to charge. The adults around Bette and Bette herself readied their weapons. Bette had a knife as backup, but her main weapon was a spear, as was the weapon for her parents and almost all of her town's adults. They raised their spears and prepared for the oncoming charge. The mass of men were clearly used to anyone facing them turning and running or fighting in a mob. They slowed but did not stop as they approached. No one on either side had anything that might be considered armor. As the mass of men struck, the front ones, seeing a wall of bristling spearheads set against them, tried to stop so they could avoid the individual spears, swat them aside with their clubs or other weapons, or perhaps even retreat. But the men behind them pushed on, and they were driven onto Bette's townfolk's spearheads. Screams rose, but the irrationalists were as good as their philosophy and kept fighting, perhaps believing that the spears were all occupied with their compatriots' guts and would not be further danger. But they were wrong. Bette, her father, and many others were able to wrench their spears free and keep fighting with them. Those who could not pulled out their knives. Everyone had been given backup weapons. But that was not the most important thing. For though some had been injured or killed, there were still more irrationalists than townsfolk on that road. But not for long. A dozen townsfolk on each side of the road, who had been hidden since until the first clashing of weapons had sprung up and run at the melee. With everyone engaged and no real leadership from the irrationalists, they fell upon their flanks and ripped them apart. Soon, perhaps a quarter of the irrationalist men were still alive and in a shape to leave. They sprinted out of the fracas and back up the road. Bette looked where they were running and saw a number of younger irrationalists watching the melee from a distance. One was Daniel. Bette raised her bloody spear and screamed into the sky. Everyone kept an eye on the few irrationalists watching from a distance, but they weren't about to start anything. Bette was shocked at her own feelings. She'd never attacked anyone in anger before, and now she had. She looked over the bodies of the fallen, almost all of whom were irrationalists, and recognized one that she had personally killed. They pulled the bodies off the side of the road, neatly lined up for the enemy to retrieve at their leisure. Bette felt good. Her namesake had done some remarkable things, but had never taken part in a battle. But she would have if needed. A group, this time of all adults, including her father, marched forward to give demands to the surviving irrationalists. They were to leave and never to return except to retrieve the bodies of their dead, which they must do within a day. Bette and her mother, meanwhile, were forming a different group. 8 of them were going to make their way north to see the situation in Rockford and possibly beyond. Bette had been told in no uncertain terms that if they needed to go on, that she, Bette, and the other teenager they were bringing, May, would be used as messengers to bring back whatever they'd learned about Rockford to their town and alert the adults that the other 6 would be going on. They left immediately, going by side paths they all knew well. They met no one on the paths and saw no one in the trees or even across the occasional clearings. It took hours to get to Rockford, even by the road, and so it would take even longer for them now that night had fallen. But they wanted to get there quickly, if possible, before the news of the battle had been brought back to Rockford, and also before the sun rose. As they went onward, they found themselves moving quickly. There was a clear sky and more than half a moon, and they could see well. After a few hours, they found themselves in view of Rockford, but it was just silhouettes. They rested a moment, as they had been pushing themselves. "Why are there no lights?" Bette asked her mother. Though a lot of technology had wasted away since the inundation, every town had managed to keep some public lighting at night. And if the electricity had finally failed, would they not substitute some kind of fire? They moved into the town. No one seemed to be around. But that wasn't too surprising. Lighting was always something of a premium, so most people went to sleep once it got dark. That didn't explain the lack of a town watch. Rockford had one, just like they did. They went to the home of Declan Kearney, Rockford's mayor. "Hold," her mom told everyone. She went on by herself. She looked into one of the windows for a while, then crept back to them. "He's in there and seems to be tied down. There are a couple of guards." Bette shook her head. "So they've taken Rockford already? Should May and I go back with this news?" "Not yet," her mom said. "Let's help some people, and once the situation is fully known, we'll send you back. But stay safe. Everyone at arms? Let's go." They moved forward. When they got on the porch, the largest of them, Leo, brought his foot up and smashed the door right by the handle. The door flew open with a great sound, and they poured inside. The two irrationalists were armed with knives, but they nearly instantly fell under the spears of Bette's townfolk. They untied Declan, who'd been bound so long that blood was leaking through the skin of his wrists. They got the information they needed. The irrationalists had marched into town a few days ago and taken over. A lot of their people were dead. They'd not been able to send word or get news from further north. The rationalists had mostly gone onward, so only a few were still in Rockford. Bette's mom said, "We need to take control back." That was all she needed to say. Declan, hurt but able to walk, brought them to the school, where a lot of the irrationalists had set themselves up. Within an hour, it was done. All the adult irrationalists in the school were dead, and the Rockford people freed. They then moved from house to house, often simply informing the occupants that they were taking the town back, sometimes fighting an irrationalist or three. By morning, Rockford was free, and Bette and May were speeding back to their town by the quickest paths just off the main road. And from there it was a series of dominoes. The irrationalists had never shored up their defenses, and though they'd killed a lot of decent people on the island, Bette's mom, with Bette often beside her, moved up the island, town by town, and freed them all. And that's the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. I enjoyed writing it. I must admit I did push the ending of a little bit faster than I would have otherwise. I am going to be traveling this next week, so there's going to be a compilation of some sort, most likely for the Sunday episode, or it will be a nonfiction one where I sort of give some sort of update or something. But most likely a compilation. That is the plan. And then I will be writing, and it'll be 2025 for the next story. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com. Hit us up on Blue Sky or Mastodon, and technically we're still on X, Twitter, but I'm rapidly dropping that. And thanks for listening. Words and Music copyright 2024, Brandon Starr, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.